The strange thing about the 1980s is that none of us knew we were standing at the end of something. We were too busy living it. The backyard was just the backyard. The summer was just the summer. The road trip was just something you did because school was out and gas was cheap and nobody had anywhere they absolutely had to be. We didn't know that the world was about to accelerate past us, that the silence we moved through every day, the long, unscheduled silence of an ordinary American childhood, was actually something rare, something that was already running out. By 1980, the country had been through a decade that almost broke it. The gas lines, the hostages, the inflation that ate through savings like something alive. We came out the other side still standing, but quieter than we used to be. Careful in a way we hadn't been before. A gallon of gas cost $1.19. The prime interest rate had just hit 21%. If your parents had a mortgage, they felt it every single month. The economy wasn't a headline. It was a conversation your parents stopped having when you walked into the room. And yet, on a Friday afternoon, someone loaded up the car. Someone packed a cooler. Someone unfolded a map, folded wrong before they even left the driveway, and pointed the whole family somewhere worth going. Because that's what we did. That's what the 80s were, underneath all the noise and all the fear and all the things we didn't have the language to name yet. We kept going. We kept building. We kept showing up for each other in backyards and at lakes and on long drives with nothing but radio static and the sound of the road. We just didn't know it would end. We never do. Winter meant the backyard. You pulled on 2 pairs of socks because one was never enough. Your mother dug through the basket by the door for gloves, not a matching pair, never a matching pair, and sent you outside. The cold hit you the moment you opened the door. You didn't care. You were already running. We built snowmen that looked nothing like the ones on the greeting cards. Ours were lopsided. Ours leaned. The arms were whatever sticks we found near the fence, and the face was whatever we had in our pockets. A button, a bottle cap, something we'd been carrying around without knowing why. We were proud of those snowmen in a way that had nothing to do with how they looked. They were ours. We made them with our own cold red hands, and that was enough to make them perfect. What we didn't understand then, what no child understands, is that somewhere above those backyards, above the snowmen and the matching glove problem, the world was doing something large and serious. Soviet bombers flew practice routes. American missiles sat in silos in the middle of the country, waiting for a phone call that never came. The president had just been shot and survived, and something in the national mood had shifted in a way nobody could quite name. Every school had drills, not just fire drills. The other kind. The one where the teacher told you to get under your desk. And you did. And you laughed because children laugh when adults are frightened, and you didn't understand yet that the desk wouldn't help. That nothing would help. That the drill was just something the adults needed to do because doing something felt better than doing nothing. And then you went home, and your mother made something hot for dinner, and your father watched the news and then turned it off. And outside the window, the snow kept falling on the lopsided snowman, and somehow that was the answer. That was how you did it. You just went back to the backyard. And sometimes you wandered off by yourself. Not because anything was wrong, not because you were sad or lonely or in need of something, just because you had discovered the particular pleasure of a thought no one else could hear. The pleasure of existing inside your own head for a while without anyone asking you anything. We called it playing. We called it nothing. We called it just being outside. Now we'd probably schedule it. Call it unstructured time. Build an app around it. Charge a monthly fee. But the thing itself, the actual feeling of it, was free. It was always free. You just had to have enough silence to find it. There were afternoons with nothing in them, not empty afternoons, full ones. Full of the specific thing that has become the hardest thing to find in the world now. Unaccounted time. Hours that belonged entirely to you. Hours no one had claimed. A kid with an instrument and a room and no particular place to be, no audience, no reason to perform. Just the sound of someone slowly figuring out who they were. Those afternoons are gone now. Not because anyone decided to end them, not because someone made a rule. They dissolved slowly, the way the light changes in autumn. You don't notice it happening until one day you look up and realize the days are already short. First came the cable channels, and the afternoons got a little shorter. Then came the video games, and the afternoons got shorter still. Then came the internet. And then came everything else. And the long, unscheduled, unclaimed afternoon became a thing from another century. The strange thing is, we have more ways to fill time now than any generation in human history. And most of us feel more restless than we ever did sitting in a room with a guitar and nowhere to be. Every few summers, we went somewhere. It wasn't a vacation the way people describe vacations now. There was no confirmation email, no travel app loading the morning itinerary. There was a map, a paper one, folded wrong before we'd even backed out of the driveway. Someone had highlighted a route in yellow marker 3 days earlier, and by the time we actually left, the map had been refolded so many times the highlighted part was in a different crease. We packed the night before. Everybody had their spot in the car. You claimed your corner of the back seat, and that was your territory for however many hours it took. There were no screens back there, no headphones, just the window, and the road, and the occasional argument about who was taking up too much space. We played the license plate game. We counted cows. We made up rules for the license plate game and then argued about the rules. We ran out of things to say and then said them anyway. We ate gas station food and didn't think of it as gas station food. We thought of it as lunch. The highway was different then. Not just physically different in the way it felt. The country felt bigger, more continuous. You could drive for 3 hours through the middle of it and not see a chain restaurant you recognized. The billboards advertised things that were local, regional, specific to wherever you were. The world hadn't been standardized yet into the same 12 brands in every direction. We were going somewhere to arrive, not to escape, not to post, not to check something off a list. We were going because the act of going, the road, the motion, the family contained inside a car moving through the country, was the point. The destination almost didn't matter. Hollywood was a place we had seen in the movies, the actual Hollywood. And then one summer, we were standing in it. You pressed your hand into the cement prints of people you had seen on a screen. Tried to make the sizes match. They never matched. The hands of famous people turned out to be the same size as everyone else's hands. That was either comforting or disappointing, depending on how old you were. We took pictures. Not to show anyone in particular, not to prove anything, just because we wanted proof that we had been there, that this was real, that we had stood in this place together and it had actually happened. We couldn't have known then that within 20 years, everyone would have a camera in their pocket at all times, and the problem wouldn't be capturing moments, it would be feeling them. That presence and documentation would become opposing forces, that the more we recorded, the less we'd actually experience. We just took the picture, and then we put the camera away, and then we looked at the thing with our actual eyes. The tar pits smelled like something from the beginning of the world. Dark and permanent and indifferent. You stood at the edge and someone told you that 10,000 years ago, animals came here to drink and never left, that the ground pulled them down, that they're still in there. You looked at the black surface and understood something without being able to say it. Something about time. About how long the world had been here before you arrived. About how briefly any of us passed through. Children in the 1980s had that experience regularly. The unfiltered encounter with something larger than themselves. A museum with real bones. a national park with actual wilderness, an ocean that didn't care whether you were comfortable. There was no version of these things designed to be more digestible. No app that gamified the experience. No screen between you and the actual thing. You either stood there and felt it, or you didn't. Most of us felt it. We stood there looking at something 10,000 years old and felt very small and very alive at the same time. That's a feeling worth crossing a continent for. And then Disneyland. The heat and the lines and the characters in their enormous suits who never broke character, who never stopped performing, who gave you the full version of the thing no matter how many children had already asked them for a hug that morning. There was a particular disbelief to being there, like the world had agreed just for this one place to be exactly what it promised, like something had been built entirely for you. Not for the general concept of children. For you, specifically, on this day, at this age, with this particular hunger for magic. You waited in lines that would have been unconscionable anywhere else, and didn't mind. You ate food that cost 3 times what it should have, and your parents paid without discussion. Because there was a silent agreement in effect. This trip happens once. This version of your childhood happens once. We are spending the money. I don't remember the rides. I remember the way the adults looked at us while we looked at everything. Their faces were doing something I didn't have the language for then. I have it now. They were watching something they knew was temporary. They were memorizing it. Parents always know, even in the best moments. Even inside the happiest summers. They know it's going. They're always a little bit grieving, even while they're smiling. Last day, the beach. The sand was finer than any sand we had felt before. Almost white in that particular California way, and the water was cold, genuinely cold even in the middle of July, and you ran straight in regardless. You always ran straight in. The cold was part of it. The shock of it was the beginning of the memory. We walked the pier, ate something fried, bought something we didn't need and kept it for years anyway until it broke or was lost or ended up in a box in the back of a closet. The ride back to the motel was quiet in the way only the last evening of a trip can be. Sunburned, tired, sand in everything. We were full. That's the only word for it. Not from food. Full from having been somewhere real, together, with our full attention on each other and nowhere else to put it. Unpacking after a trip like that had its own ritual. The car held the whole journey in it. Sunscreen and diner stops, and motel soap, and the ocean. You brought all of it inside with the bags, and it faded slowly over the next few days, and you let it go a little at a time, and tried not to notice when it was finally gone. Somebody was always asleep before you got home. You carried them inside without waking them, set them down carefully, pulled the blanket up, stood there a moment longer than necessary. The house felt different when you came back to it. Not because anything had changed. Because you had, a little. That's what travel used to do. It gave you a new angle on your own ordinary life, made you see it again instead of just moving through it. That effect lasted about a week. Then everything went back to normal. But for that 1 week, the ordinary felt like something you'd chosen. Summer in the 80s had a different rhythm, slower, longer, the kind of slow that you don't notice until it's gone. The days didn't end. They dissolved. The light hung in the sky until 9 in the evening, and we used every minute of it. Ate outside when there was no reason to eat outside. Sat on porches doing nothing in particular until the dark finally arrived and gave us permission to go inside. July meant somebody was hosting. It didn't matter whose yard. Didn't matter if the grass was long or the chairs matched, or there was enough of the good stuff or too much of the thing nobody actually wanted. Somebody put out a folding table, and everybody brought something. And that was the plan. That was the entire plan. Factories were beginning to close in places that thought they never would. In the industrial cities and the steel towns, fathers were coming home quieter than they used to. Something economic had started shifting underneath the country. The beginning of something large and slow and irreversible, even if most families didn't have the language for it yet. But in the backyard, in July, with the folding table out and everyone there, that was very far away. Present but distant, like thunder you can hear but can't see. You knew it was somewhere. You just couldn't see it from where you were standing. Nobody confirmed attendance. Nobody sent a reminder. You just showed up because it was July, and showing up was what July was for. Some summers we didn't go far. You loaded up the camper, or borrowed somebody else's, or followed somebody else's out to wherever they knew about, and drove maybe 2 hours and found a flat piece of ground in the trees. And that was your world for a few days. No signal, no agenda, no version of anywhere else competing for your attention. The adults sat outside in low chairs and talked until the light was completely gone. Long conversations about nothing important that turned into conversations about everything important. You could hear their voices from wherever you had wandered off to. Low, unhurried. The occasional laugh that told you everything was all right. You didn't need to hear the words. The sound of adults talking quietly in the near distance was its own kind of safety. Proof that someone had things handled, that the large adult world with its large adult problems was being managed by people who knew what they were doing. Of course, they didn't always know what they were doing. Nobody ever does. They were figuring it out the same way every generation figures it out. As they went, in the dark, hoping they were getting enough right. But from where you were sitting, from a child's distance, in the last light of a summer evening, with the trees all around and the voices carrying low through the air, they seemed like they had it handled. And that was enough. It was more than enough. I miss that feeling more than I miss any specific place I've ever been. The feeling of being small in the right way, taken care of, not responsible yet for anything that mattered. Every summer had water. A lake, or a river, or a creek narrow enough to jump across in one go. Something cold you could get into. Something that didn't belong to anyone. The older kids jumped first, always first, to prove it was safe, and because proving things was what being older meant. The younger ones watched from the bank, and then went anyway, regardless of what had been proven. The fathers were in the water. Actually in it, not watching from a chair with a beer. Shoulder deep, arms out. The little ones held on and let go and held on again, and each time they let go, they went a little farther. That was the whole lesson. That was the only lesson that mattered that summer. You swam until your lips went blue, and your fingers went wrinkled, and your skin went to goose flesh. And someone on the bank would finally say enough, and you'd climb out and lie on a towel in the sun, and the heat came back into you slowly from the outside in, and there was nothing in the world but the warmth and the sound of water and the smell of a summer day at its absolute fullest. You were not thinking about the future. You were not thinking about anything. You were just there, just warm, just completely and entirely present in the way that children are, and adults spend the rest of their lives trying to get back to. Reagan was talking about the evil empire. Somewhere in Europe, American and Soviet tanks sat across from each other at a distance of 200 yards. The Bulletin of Atomic Scientists had moved the doomsday clock to 3 minutes to midnight. The world was closer to nuclear war than it had been since the Cuban Missile Crisis, and we were in a lake in July, and the sun was doing what the sun does in July, and a child was letting go of a father's hands and going a little farther than she had yesterday. That is not an irony. That is not naivety. That is the human thing. That is what we have always done. We have always found the lake. We have always gotten in. Birthdays were a specific kind of serious. There was a cake, maybe made at the kitchen table the night before, the bowls still in the sink in the morning. Maybe from the grocery store in a white box. Didn't matter. There were candles, and someone counted them wrong. And it didn't matter. Everybody crowded around and sang badly, and the child at the center of it closed their eyes so tight it looked like they were lifting something heavy with their whole face. 3 gifts, maybe 4, each one chosen carefully because there weren't going to be 50 of them. Unwrapped slowly, held, thanked for, not because anyone told you to be grateful, because you actually were. Somewhere in the country, children were going without. The recession of 81 and 82 had been the worst since the Great Depression. Unemployment hit nearly 11%. Families that thought they were stable found out they weren't. The gap between the birthday in the home movie and the birthday that wasn't happening was wider than most people wanted to admit. But in this backyard, on this afternoon, with this cake and these candles and these people crowded around, there was this birthday and these people and this cake. That was the whole thing. And it was enough. It was more than enough. The child blew out the candles, and everyone cheered, and for one moment the world was exactly as large as this backyard, and no larger. And that was exactly the right size. I've been trying to understand what actually changed, not what the history books say changed, not the technology or the economics or the politics. Those are real. But that's not what I mean. I mean the texture of daily life, the grain of an ordinary afternoon, the specific weight of a summer that didn't have to be anything other than summer. The 80s ended. The Cold War ended with it, not with the explosion everyone had been quietly dreading for 40 years, but with a wall coming down on television while everyone watched. The economy restructured. The factories that had started closing kept closing. The jobs that left didn't come back. The suburbs that had been full of one-income families slowly required 2. Then 2 incomes weren't enough either. The pace of everything accelerated, and then the internet arrived, and then the smartphone, and then the notifications, and the algorithm, and the endless scroll, and suddenly the long, unscheduled afternoon wasn't something you had to fill. It was something you had to defend, something you had to actively protect against the 1,000 things competing for the hours that used to just belong to you. That's what changed, not the big things, the small ones, the silence, the unscheduled hour, the afternoon with nothing in it, the capacity to sit in a backyard and let time pass without it feeling like a waste. I'm not saying the 80s were better. They weren't, not in every way. The fear was real. The inequality was real. The things we didn't talk about at dinner were real. But there was something in the texture of those days that is genuinely gone. Not gone the way things go when they evolve into something better. Gone the way things go when something is lost before anyone realized it was something worth keeping. We were standing at the end of something and we didn't know it. That's not a failure. That's just how it works. You never know you're in the last of something until you're looking back at it from the other side. The last long summer. The last trip with the wrong folded map. The last birthday where 3 gifts was not only enough, but felt like abundance. The last afternoon that belonged entirely to you, with no one anywhere asking anything of it. We lived those days the only way anyone can live any day, without knowing what they were. We thought ordinary life would always stay ordinary. We thought the backyard would always be there. The lake would always be cold in July. The map would always be in the glove compartment, folded wrong, covered in someone's highlighter from a trip we took years ago. We thought the long summer afternoons with nothing required of them were just the shape of time. Not a gift, not something rare, just Tuesday, just the weekend, just the way things were. We didn't know we were living inside something that would disappear. We never do. None of us ever do.